Hello, everyone. Welcome to Porch Talks, a project of Rolling Pepperoni. We are convened together in an effort to unite different parts of Appalachia, share our stories, and find some sense of belonging in our shared commonalities in this challenging time during the COVID crisis. Today, for the third episode of Porch Talks, we're interviewing Chuck Corra and Big John Isner of Appodlachia. We're extremely excited to talk to these two gentlemen because of the work that they've been doing in defining Appalachia, sharing stories, and uncovering stories as well. Today, Felicia Cooper, Rolling Pepperoni's story coordinator, will be interviewing them, and Jacqueline, Rolling Pepperoni's other story coordinator, will be chiming in. Jacqueline, if you would like to say hello.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it was great.
That's great. And then additionally, Jerry and Sandy Rechtenwald will be finishing our time on the porch with Take Me Home Country Roads by John Denver. So get excited, relax, and take it away, Felicia.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for that intro, Kat. I'm really happy that we can all be here together in whatever capacity that means for us. So, Big John, Chuck, if you could just introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what you do, what's going on in your life.
Chuck, I'll let you do the intros. You always do it on the podcast. So,
wow, thank you. Well, thanks for having us, guys. I'm really excited about this. I hope I'm coming in okay. If I'm not, just let me know. So my name's Chuck Corra. I'll let John introduce himself, but to give us a little background, John and I, we go way back. How far back do we go? I think we were in high school newspaper class together in Parkersburg, West Virginia. So we go back really far. We're college roommates for a time, and we've always been kind of involved in politics, public policy, just social issues, things like that. We always have strong opinions, loosely held. And we had tossed around the idea of creating a podcast about West Virginia, but more than just West Virginia, because John lives in West Virginia right now. I'm in Tennessee. I'm getting ready to move to Virginia, but for the past 5 years, have lived in Nashville, worked in East Tennessee and advocacy, a number of things. So we have an exposure to a lot of different parts of Appalachia, and we really wanted to both channel our passions for where we're from and also talk about the issues that are really important to us, and that I think, and John would probably agree, that probably don't get enough attention or don't get enough authentic voices to talk about them. And so that was, I think, the vision of Appodlachia when we started it. And I think it's sort of evolved from there. But one thing that, just to kind of put a button on this, it's been really awesome since we started, is meeting a number of different people of all different stripes who are from Appalachia, but represent a different aspect of it that is not like well known or well covered in like the mainstream media. And so I think that was something that's really cool, and we really are looking forward to continuing doing that. And so I think that probably gives you a good intro. John, you wanna take it from there?
Yeah, I'm John Isner, go by Big John. Probably the easiest way to recognize me. I agree with everything Chuck has said. I think for us, Appalachia has always kind of been a very authentic, unique place without an authentic, unique voice. And so when we created this podcast, we always wanted to do the region justice. And we kind of figured, if not us, who's going to do it and who's going to do it right. And we hope it's us, obviously. And we've been lucky enough to have support of a lot of people, and obviously have been able to meet, a ton of people that we would have never met before. So this is definitely a podcast that has really allowed us to learn just as our listeners learn too.
I will also add, John, I forgot to mention this, that a lot of this started coming about actually in 2018 when John was running for office in the Eastern Panhandle, and John can tell you more about that. But he ran in for a House of Delegates race in West Virginia in a very deep red district as a Democrat, and we kind of like I helped him basically from afar, and we ran a shoe leather campaign that honestly made a huge impact and a huge difference. But it really, I think, put us up front and center, particularly John, on a lot of the issues that are impacting not just West Virginia, but the region as a whole. And so I think that kind of served as an impetus. And I think we both liked covering the issues and talk about the issues on the campaign and thought, well, why end it there?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a wonderful place to start, and really meaningful that it was born of you trying to make very real change in the places that you care about. So you're from Parkersburg, West Virginia. How and when did you leave Parkersburg, West Virginia?
Sure.
Did you leave?
I did. John, I guess, kind of did, but is back there now. I left, let's see. Well, I mean, I left for college. I went to Morgantown WVU for 2 years, transferred to Shepherd University, Eastern Panhandle. I consider leaving when I went to law school at Michigan State University in East Lansing, because after that, I haven't really lived permanently. I haven't been domiciled. There you go, John, for a little law school in West Virginia since then. And so that would have been 2012. But up until that point, I mean, I spent the first, 22, 23 years of my life in West Virginia, primarily in Parkersburg, while spending some summers in Romney.
Yeah, and I'm kind of the same way. I mean, I've never lived outside of West Virginia, visited obviously a lot of places, been able to travel, but I've stayed in West Virginia, but I have left Parkersburg. I think we were gone for about 8 years for undergrad and law school. So definitely got to travel the state and travel a lot, but have tried to maintain that I want to stay in West Virginia as long as possible.
So you knew when you left that you wanted to come back?
Yeah, it's actually when I had to, my wife and I, we had a lot of really good offers from law schools, and it kind of just came down to, could we make an impact in West Virginia? And the answer to us was yes. So that's why we decided not to leave.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So speaking of wives, speaking of West Virginia, how are your communities and families dealing with this? How are you all doing?
So so my community here in Nashville, which is relatively small, is pretty normal aside from the whole work from home thing, which we're really grateful that both my wife and I are able to do. We both have jobs that we have the privilege to work from home. We're really grateful for that. My family, my parents and my sister and her husband live in Parkersburg still, and they seem to be doing well. I think, especially in Parkersburg, and John can speak more to this, most of their lives are pretty normal. My sister is a school teacher, and so basically summer vacation essentially started a few months early, unfortunately, to a lot of degrees. But my parents, I think they've just been held up in their house, which is good that they're not putting themselves at risk of being exposed to the coronavirus. But at the same time, it's really hard to, I think, for them to get out, for them to do things, and just for like us to be able to see each other. I think that's probably one of the harder things. We don't get to see each other very often. And so this kind of puts a dent into that ability. And so I think it's becoming a lot more real for people. I think that's why, in fact, a lot of folks are doing Zoom conferences like this, because I don't know for you all, but for me, like I've Zoomed with a lot of my friends from law school who I talk to on a regular basis via text, but never see really, aside from maybe like once a year. And so I think that our communities, at least mine, are adapting in that way. And I hope that after all this is over, we start to, myself included, obviously, to be able to see each other in person more and maintain those ties a little bit more deliberately.
Yeah, here in West Virginia, my wife and I are lucky enough to have jobs where we can work from home. I think it's really starting to hit the area now. West Virginia was kind of a late bloomer when it came to the coronavirus, mostly because our governor refused to have an adequate number of tests. And now that we're testing a lot of people, you're seeing more and more are actually positive for the coronavirus. And I think mostly, unfortunately, in West Virginia and Parkersburg specifically, people don't take it as seriously because of the low number of quote unquote affected people, which is really sad to see, because in actuality, that number is much higher than what we see. So we've been lucky. My 70-year-old mom is actually sewing masks every day for like 8 hours a day. And today I was lucky enough to, I had leftover campaign money. And so I donated 100% of it to them so that way they could have enough supplies to continue to make masks and ensure that, the community was at least being able to have that. So hopefully that goes to good use.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I'm really, I'm super psyched that you were able to do that. And I think like what Chuck said, right, this like deliberate strengthening of the bonds that you already have has been such a lifeline, right? Like such a point of hope, is being able to see and connect to people who you maybe already know, you maybe already care about, but people who you can, now you know that you can rely on them for care and for support. Yeah. So I know we kind of talked a little bit about this, but when you all decided to do Appodlachia, well, first of all, what is your preferred pronunciation? Where would you like the stress?
We are accepting of all pronunciations of it.
Lovely, thank you. So had you done similar work in the past? I know you said that it had been born out of a campaign, but how did you decide that this should definitely be a podcast? And had you already been reporting, like maybe your high school newspaper class?
I don't think it was the high school newspaper class. For us, it was kind of podcast or bust. Neither of us, especially me, have the face for YouTube. So it's one of those things. If I can sit behind a microphone, I'm probably much better off. And to us, a podcast, obviously I'm speaking for Chuck, but a podcast kind of means, in my opinion, a better offering. So kind of, something that we want to present to you, you either take it or leave it. So I think that's what makes podcasts so cool, is it's just nitty and gritty. And, if people start to follow you, you're probably doing a good job. If people aren't, it's really easy to tell whether or not you're being successful.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that my blistering hot takes in the Parkersburg South Continental Clarion did certainly serve as a primer for what we do now. I kid. I mean, yeah, like I've always had an interest in journalism, and let me premise this by saying I do not consider us journalists. We're not reporters, but just from a standpoint of telling stories and media in general, I've always had an interest in that. And in fact, we did an episode recently on the 10th anniversary of the Upper Big Branch mine disaster. And that event actually got me started in advocacy writing, because I saw that nobody was really talking about it in the mainstream media. And so the only thing I knew to do was to write about it on a blog, which that was a thing back in 2010. And so that's really kind of what fueled my passion for it. I think with podcasts generally, one thing we decided with it is like, we can make it a podcast, but we could allow our creative juices to flow, and we could have creative control over that. We have like social media pages too, where we try to like produce different types of content that we're really starting to kind of map that out on what that's going to look like going forward. But as podcasts as a medium can be really powerful, and they can reach everybody everywhere, especially with the nature of smartphones and just like internet now, aside from those huge gaps in rural broadband in Appalachia, which we'll certainly get into, but I do think that like it was something that both John and I we liked podcasts. We wanted to do one, and it allowed us to really harness our creativity, but also just our passions and our opinions and put it in an outlet that we think made the most sense. And so I think like what we've seen at the podcast, as I mentioned, is it's allowed us to both harness social media to produce different types of content. We just did a regional map of what people consider the topping that you put on hot dogs. Things like that, where we've just kind of been able to do like whatever we want, whatever people are interested in, and just kind of churn our own creativity into a passion and into something that's interesting that people enjoy. And so I think that's kind of, it started out as a podcast and it obviously still is, but it's something that's allowed us to kind of branch out in different directions. And so it's been a lot of fun.
Good. Yeah. How has the podcast itself had to adapt in recent weeks? I mean, just moving around, and has it changed the way that you make what you do, or has it changed the type of things that you'd like to talk about and focus on?
For us, when this all happened, I mean, it doesn't change anything in terms of recording because Chuck and I are always in different locations. So we're always using some type of technology to record together. But in terms of what we were covering, our focus for the last couple of weeks has really been on creating episodes that are centered around some type of positivity. Now the UBB mine disaster, you can't spin that in a positive light, but we felt like we had to still cover it at that time. But otherwise, if you go and check out our old episodes during the last month, I mean, we did an entire episode on the Mothman and released it as an extra episode to help people get through this, like a tough time. And you know, we promised in the episode that we wouldn't mention the coronavirus. So, I mean, that's just kind of how we've been able to adapt.
Yeah, I agree. I'd piggyback on that too and say, like, I think from our standpoint, John's been in the same place. I think I mentioned before, I'm moving to Northern Virginia, and I've been up there temporarily for the past 6 months, working in DC. And so I've kind of had to go back and forth, and I'm back in Tennessee now. So like it didn't really interrupt things, but it kind of disrupted our flow a bit. I'm also in a different time zone now, which is interesting. But I think, like we've had some deliberate conversations about like how we want to structure the content during this. And I think that we probably will touch on the virus and the response a little bit, but we wanted to really create an outlet for people if they're looking to escape that and just hear things that we would normally cover, that we wanted to create that space for that. Because I mean, you can find any podcast dime a dozen that is going to be talking about the coronavirus, and you're going to see it on your TV every day, and you're going to see it in your life every day when you're walking on a sidewalk and someone skips the other side of the sidewalk out of love for you, not because they don't like you. So I think, I think that we've really tried to put some thought into that. I don't know that our content necessarily would be all that different, but I think that the deliberation of actually going forth and doing these types of things that deliberately avoid that certainly has. But like John mentioned, I mean, I do think there was some intention with doing some more positive or just like funny or humorous or just attempts at being entertaining, to like try to get people's minds off things and give them a brief reprieve.
Definitely. Yeah, it's really important right now, I think, to find the ways that we can uphold like lightheartedness and like find the small lights that we can. So what is an example of like something new or something that surprised you that you learned in doing this podcast, whether it be through the relationships that you formed or through the research that you've done for your episodes?
That is a great question. I can start with some of my ideas, and John, you can take it away too. So I think just like, first of all, the extensiveness of people that are interested in content about Appalachia and just in general. I mean, I think when you go online or when you just hear from people that listen or people that we've talked to, you know, there's a desire for stuff like this. And that alone was something that I think was at least a little surprising for me, because we're used to like not hearing anything about West Virginia or Appalachia, or if it is things we hear about, it's usually like bad stuff or stereotypes from other people. So that was a kind of a delightful surprise. I think one thing, one of the episodes we did with Chelsea Dobert-Keene from Queer Appalachia, was that there is just this really beautiful, thriving queer community in Appalachia that John and I really didn't know much, if anything, about until starting this. And talking to Chelsea and learning about that community, their struggle, but also their resilience, and the project of Queer Appalachia in general and how it came about was really beautiful and really powerful. And I think that episode accomplished one of the big purposes of Appodlachia, which is to shine a light on things about Appalachia that other people aren't hearing about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. For us, our kind of our rate of episodes has been kind of unique too. If you look at where we started, it was kind of, I won't say all over the place, but it was, we were essentially trying to find ourselves. And then as you go on, we start to kind of hit our stride, and you see, kind of a buildup. I mean, the topics that we've covered have been so far apart. I mean, you've got marijuana to Queer Appalachia to opioids, a film about opioids. These are the things that I didn't think about whenever we started this podcast. I kind of just thought, it'd be two dudes sitting behind microphones complaining about politics. But in actuality, it's been honestly eye-opening. It's been kind of a beautiful thing, because a lot of things about Appalachia are hidden, and they shouldn't be. And that's kind of why we started the podcast in the first place. And it just, we continue to look at the region that we think we know and learn every day. So I think it's a really cool aspect of having that podcast.
That's awesome. And I think like we found similarly that like there is so much surprising about the region, and there's so much going on that you just don't see unless you're looking for it.
Yeah.
If you'll indulge me for just a moment, something that I learned today on the Elkins, West Virginia website is that, so I found some ramps on a morning hike. Super psyched about it. Thank goodness. But I read on the Elkins, West Virginia website that ramps were prescribed as like a tonic. And the reasoning behind it is that if you've eaten ramps that day, your breath is so bad that everyone wants to maintain social distance.
I think you just solved the coronavirus.
I mean, leave it to Appalachia, right?
Yeah, we
Right.
will be prescribing ramps from now on.
We need to get you on that White House task force.
Yeah.
So, what are like, you have a fairly radical podcast politically. Speaking of roots and ramps, pretty radical, pretty forthright, pretty outward about your political opinions. And I'm wondering, like, what are some legal and social standards that you want your podcast to uphold, whether that's inclusivity, in terms of inclusivity, or just justice? Like, what is it that you hope is true throughout your time as podcasters?
I think that's the first time I've ever been called radical.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm mostly, the funny thing is when Chuck and I politically talk, a lot of the time, at least for me, I'm viewed mostly as a centrist. So the funny thing is this podcast has allowed me to talk about, the things that I feel, but I honestly don't know if we're really radical. I think we're just willing to tell it like it is. And I think a lot of people see that as this like radical mentality, but in actuality, it's just us being very passionate about how we feel about the region. Now, we're not going to hide that we're both Democrats and lean left. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but we try to be fair as possible. We'll call out either party. This podcast has no political affiliation. Nobody pays us money to be nice to them, and everybody, in my opinion, is free game to talk about. It's just right now, unfortunately, the Republicans have been the ones that have been screwing up the most. So if the Democrats start to catch up on that, I'm sure we'll talk about that too.
Oh, they're getting there.
Yeah. Politics is such an interesting place nowadays. I think, I would agree that I guess the radical thing is that we have unvarnished opinions. And I think that's kind of one of the big purposes that we started out with was we wanted to be authentic because so much that's covered about Appalachia, both, like in the mainstream media and by people that aren't from there, is inauthentic or it's inaccurate or what have you. And so, regardless of if people agreed with us or not, we wanted it to be genuine. And I think we both come from a place where we want the truth to be spoken, and the truth how we from our vantage point, right? Both objective and subjectively. And so I think that's kind of the approach that we take. We want diverse voices on our show. We're happy to have them. We just, like John said, happen to both kind of be in a similar area on the political spectrum. And I think the being center left is pretty, I think, fairly how we would describe it. But I do think we want to be a place where even if we have disagreements with people, they're welcome on, and we welcome that discussion, because I think that that's equally as important. We don't want to be like an echo chamber, so to speak. From a legal perspective, we try not to get sued. And as we mentioned several times on our show that we are not lawyers, despite going to law school, but our wives are. So, hopefully if we do get sued, they can represent us. But I think that's the line that we tell. I don't think we do anything that would really run us afoul of that. From a social standpoint, we want to give people, especially marginalized people, a voice, whether it's from them themselves or from highlighting issues that are impacting them. The thing about Appalachia is that Appalachian Americans are marginalized people in general. And so you have this whole construct in and of itself. And so I think radical is an interesting way to describe it. I think that's interesting. It's been interesting to find our voice with that. So radical in the sense that we expressed our viewpoint, no holds barred. Then yeah, I agree with that.
Well, I'll jump in right there. I think also we may come off as radical, and honestly, this is the first time I've ever thought about it, so I'm glad that you said it, because this kind of has given me clarity. But I think we come off as radical because of the topics we cover. The topics we cover just happen to be on the left, because Appalachia has in recent days been very far right. So if you talk about anything that's far right, or Confederate flags or anything like that, and you speak about them in a positive term, you're not looked at as radical. You're looked at as kind of like the status quo. But if you go against any of those, or if you cover topics like, Queer Appalachia, or you cover a short film that talks about what it's actually like to be an opioid addict, or you talk about the legalization of marijuana, you're looked at as radical. But in actuality, if you break down how Appalachia feels, you would probably be able to have a pretty good look at our podcast kind of being on center with what Appalachians feel. It's just, unfortunately, you have that minority of people who are the loudest, and our podcast and our hope for the podcast is that we can be just as loud.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a really good point. I totally agree with that.
Sometimes I have great points.
All the time. Hey, that's what keeps this podcast afloat right there.
That's the only reason Chuck keeps me.
I think that's a great point as well. And I'll interject, because when we started collecting stories, some of stories to the question, what is Appalachia? Interestingly, they were a lot harsher, or one could say more radical than we thought it would turn out to be. And we questioned, wow, these stories are very harsh. Should we print these on a pepperoni roll? Is that fair? Should we tone it down? Should we not print something so honest? But as we continued to collect answers to the question, what is Appalachia? They all shared this tone. And like you said, it actually isn't a radical thought it is mainstream. It's just not generally the tone that is portrayed as Appalachia. You know, there's this dialogue that is created for us that doesn't really convey any of our own thoughts or opinions.
I,
Great point.
I think that's the something. It's a man-made ideal that's not actually made in Appalachia, and so it's one of those things that we have to continue to look at and fight. And if Chuck and I are labeled as radical or far left or what, I really don't care. It's mostly just the fact that if our podcast can make people feel comfortable talking about how they actually feel, then we're successful. And that's really the only thing that we hope comes from this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I would say I think that oftentimes what the controlling narrative is, especially about Appalachia, is not always the case. And so, for example, I'll use as an example, I think it's a good one. Back when I worked in advocacy in Tennessee, very red state, from a outside perspective, you think very conservative, very, probably harsh on immigration, things like that. And we worked for an immigration organization that advocated for DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and very polarizing topic, unfortunately, in national discussion. And my task was to rally grassroots support to try to push Republican lawmakers in Tennessee to support pathway to citizenship and to protect dreamers. And so from an outsider's perspective, you look at that and you think that's, there's nobody, no Republican would ever support that. And what I found doing this organizing work for over a year, especially parts of East Tennessee, but also Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and Middle Tennessee, and all throughout the state, you find all these very conservative Republicans, people who are, Trump supporters or never Trump Republicans or anybody on the political spectrum. I found people who 100% agree with that and who fought like hell to try to convince Republican lawmakers in Tennessee to do that. I sat down with a gentleman who was one of the most far right leaning Republicans in the Tennessee state legislature. And he was like, it makes sense to me. And so I think that example I share because when you get into the nitty gritty of things like that, you find that maybe the common conception of something is false, or you may not be getting the full story. And I think I view that as Appalachia in general. We hear all these things about it. You probably know our opinion of Hillbilly Elegy if you listen to our podcast. And so all these things toothless, no shoes, inbred, cannibal hillbillies, and that's how we're portrayed, and that's the narrative. But you start to pull back the layers. You don't even have to pull them back that far. You just have to look, and you find that none of that is true, and it's quite the contrary.
Yeah. And when I use the word radical, you both went to law school, so I'm not afraid to use a bit of Latin here, right? It's radicalis, right? Having to do with the root of the issue, of the idea. Right. It's about, like you said, looking authentically at that story and finding out what the root of it is and why it's meaningful to tell that story. And I like to think of it as stories rather than necessarily political agendas. Not that I'm afraid of, engaging in political agendas, but I think it's more meaningful and more accessible to people that way.
Yeah.
Hey, Zaheen, good to see you.
I like that. That I think perfectly encapsulates us.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, you can use that on your next podcast if you want. So yeah, we kind of talked a little bit about what you wish more people knew about the region, but if there's anything that you left out or that you'd want to address, feel free to speak up.
I think for me, when as we mentioned, I ran for office, I ran in a really, really, really red district. No Democrat had gotten over 29% of the vote. And so when I went into that, I kind of just thought, we'll do the best we can. Chuck was kind of like an unofficial consultant, I guess you would call it, but I never paid him, which was nice. So that's always a nice thing. But when we went into it, we kind of thought we wanted to have a certain mentality going into it, that if we could at least change some people's minds, then it's a win. And the one thing I want to say about Appalachia is, you may see like Trump flags, you may see like very, Confederate flags, but when I ran, I knocked on all those doors because I wanted to know what the difference between them and I really was. And luckily for me, I was only chased off one time, and the majority of other people were very happy to see me. I don't think that we as people in politics are so far separate. I think it's just this identity crisis that people go through, that they have to be, it's almost like football. Like, I'm a fan of the Bengals, so I have to hate the Steelers. And that's how Republican and Democrats are acting at right now too. And I say that because I know that you all are located in Pittsburgh, and I'm a Bengals fan. So I think that's the biggest thing is we're really not that different. It's just, in Appalachia, we really just need to meet people where they are.
Yeah, I would agree completely with that. And I think that rather than what I want people to know, I think I would say what I want people to do, and that is have some intellectual curiosity about the place. I think there's so much beauty in the region, and it's hardly ever talked about. It's hardly ever discussed. And you look at the states that are like encompass a lot of the region: Kentucky, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. They come up during like, people look at it from a construct of red versus blue, or how did they vote? And if West Virginia is 42% approval for Trump, so like, I don't want to listen to anybody from there because I don't like Trump, and vice versa. And I just think that, like, I know that that's a similar case for a lot of places in the country, but I think especially for Appalachia. And I think that it merits just some attention, some curiosity about it. And that's something that I hope that our podcast accomplishes, is stokes that curiosity, gets people interested, whether they're from there or not.
Yeah. What we found is that so many people want to focus on what is worth like saving about Appalachia. And I kind of think like, if like people, right, whether you're a Trump supporter, whether you're a never Trumper, whether you're the most leftist weirdo there is, weirdo, I say weirdo very endearingly, by the way, but like, if you were all to draw a picture of what your ideal Appalachia would look like, it's likely that they would look pretty similar, right? Like, we all found or are finding something beautiful and something to love about this region. It's why we stayed there, right? So I say that from New England, but I think that that's like, holding that vision in your heart will bring us closer together. I hope. I hope I'm not. So have you ever had a pepperoni roll? You had to have, right?
You don't get this physique without eating pepperoni rolls. Are you kidding me? I feel like that's all I ever eat. And funny enough, I was weirdly scrolling through your all's website, just like telling my wife how much I would needed a pepperoni roll. So I'm sure at some point we'll be making an order, because I've got to try all the pepperoni rolls I can.
We'll get you some.
Absolutely. Core staple food group of the Corra household, dates back many years. In fact, I have ingredients to make some actually in my fridge in a little bit, but JR's Donut Castle, Parkersburg, West Virginia, some of the best. Grew up on those, really learned to love the wonderful Appalachian delicacy. And I will say that what does grind my gears is people, when they see it and they refer to it as a pizza roll.
Ugh.
I'm just like,
it's not a pizza roll.
But that's where education component comes in. We'll probably have an episode exclusively on pepperoni rolls.
Yep.
Oh, I mean, I think they're an amazing, amazing food for so many reasons. And, just learning more about like the history and the self-reliance that it took for Italian immigrant miners to create this like shelf-stable, super nutritious, like delicious meal, I think is really remarkable. But then can I assume that you're on team slices and not on team pepperoni sticks?
I'm a slices guy.
Oh, thank goodness. Yes. Yes. Good to hear it.
Same. I've been confused by the sticks for a long time. I don't want to foreclose it, and I don't want to say that it's not right, so to speak. But slices for me all day.
Mm-hmm. There's also a very small contingency of people who like just ground pepperoni in a roll, but slices come out on top. And no matter how many times I ask the question, yeah, Kat says slices for life.
Yeah.
Which is a great time to kind of open up the conversation and say, is there anyone listening right now who has a question for Chuck and Big John? Anybody? Okay.
Would you two mind talking about the UBB mine disaster a little bit?
Sure.
Chuck, go ahead and take that one.
Yeah. I guess it's a little bit of inside baseball if you're not from West Virginia, maybe, or Eastern Kentucky. But basically, 10 years ago, almost to the day, a large explosion, a gas leak explosion in a mine in Raleigh County, West Virginia, a place called Mont Coal, very small coal mining community, caused an explosion in a mine, and it killed, I believe, 29 miners. And at the time, I think it was either the largest or second largest mine-related disaster in the country's history or in the state's history. I don't have the details in front of me, but basically, it was something that captured the entire state in the sense of John and I talked about this a little bit. If you're in West Virginia, you remember where you were when you heard about it, and because I think West Virginia, just in general, and I think this probably applies to Appalachia too, is such like a tight-knit community in the sense that that we relate to each other's struggles and can identify with it a lot. And even though we didn't know anybody personally that was impacted by the mining disaster, we all knew somebody that knew somebody, or we had friends who worked in the mines as well, or who had some connection to it. And so as a community, it was a really big grieving experience. And I think there was a huge investigation that came out of it, and it was found that the company running the mine, Massey Energy, had failed to fix a number of safety code violations both federal and state mine safety officials had docked them for. Davitt McAteer, a fantastic attorney, he was working out at Shepherdstown. I don't know if he's still there anymore, but he led the independent probe that came up with the findings of this. But basically, a broad takeaway from a policy standpoint was it was cheaper for the mining company to pay the fine associated with the safety violation rather than fix the problem. And that's what Massey Energy did. And they did so in a way that was malicious because a lot of the miners knew about this. They knew that the ventilation was horrible in the mine, and the old adage of canary in a coal mine certainly not literally applied, but in the sense that they knew that there were issues with ventilation, and one spark in a mine like that would ignite something, and that's what happened. And so you had all these men that had no choice but to go into the mines every single day, knowing that day could be their last, because it was either that or lose their job, because Massey also had a history of busting unions, essentially refusing to allow miners to unionize. I believe I will premise this with saying I don't know that they were ever found to have broken labor laws. I'm not sure about that, but I think there was a substantial amount of evidence to suggest that they broke a number of labor laws by not allowing miners to unionize. And so all that being said, the CEO of that company, Massey Energy, Don Blankenship, was convicted on a charge of conspiracy and was, I think, did about a year in federal prison. In our opinion, certainly not enough at all. And I think just the willful acts that he engaged in to endanger these miners' lives in the pursuit of money at the end of the day was horrendous. And it's something that personally really fired me up about labor rights movements in general, coming from a union household, but also just like the amount of problems that were still happening in coal mines and just in general, and how poorly treated the workers were, the people that go down there and work their tail off every day. And so yeah, I mean, that's like a broad overview. John, if you want to jump in, I know I've talked forever, so.
I think you nailed it. Well, if you want to know our full opinions, we will not say them here, but because they're like PG-13. But feel free to check out that episode for our podcast. But just know, if you're a Don Blankenship fan, you're not gonna like it.
Nice. And oh shoot. Oh, were you gonna say something, Kat?
Well, I just sort of had another kind of follow-up question, because, as you bring up a mining disaster, and we think about, very much within the context of that disaster was the company's decision to disregard all of the people working. And I think that has been the mining story, that has been the history of mining in West Virginia and America since its inception in Fairmont. So as we go forward as a region and as a state, and we do, like Felicia mentioned, want to preserve what makes our region special and what, matters to us and what has given us identity. What are aspects that you think are good for West Virginians and Appalachians going forward? Mayor Bill Peduto mentioned how he really wants to introduce coding into more rural schools and in West Virginia. And he said something along the lines, if, West Virginians and Pittsburghers built this country with coal and steel, now we're building another world with coding, and these are the people to do it. How do you think about, that transition, that shift, and what are healthy, advantageous ways to move forward?
So we covered I'll put in quotes, a program called Mind Mines, and you might have heard of it because it was probably the worst debacle when it comes to coding and training miners. Essentially, it was this program that got a ton of federal money, and the whole purpose of it was to teach miners to code. People quit their jobs. People essentially gave everything they had to go to these classes and to learn, and then all of a sudden there were no opportunities. The money was gone. The person who was running the program upped and left and received no punishment. And so when it comes to anything like this, with minors, I'm a little, reluctant to say that. And I think it's also, I'll speak to in minors in general. I think it's not, mining is unique. So there are very few occupations where we look at somebody and we say, you shouldn't do that, or we can give you a better opportunity because mines are bad and yada, yada, yada. And that's fine. But I think it's unfair because there are people who, one, make great money when it comes to mining, and two, really actually enjoy it. And so I would hate to have something pushed on them. I do think that opportunities with technology in Appalachia, and especially West Virginia and Pittsburgh, can benefit everyone. And so I would love to see that. I think we have a ton of work to do before then, though. We have to implement rural broadband to the point where we could actually run fiber throughout every state that we have in Appalachia, because without it, all of those things fail. You can't code on dial-up, so that tends to be a problem, especially in West Virginia. So until that's fixed, I love the idea, and I think it's stuff that we need to move towards. I think in the interim, we need to focus on things like renewable energy, bringing companies that are willing to hire miners to work in the energy industry would be fantastic, and creating tax breaks and whatever is needed for those companies to do that, I think would be amazing. And hopefully you get companies who are willing to invest, because they're going to need broadband too. So I think that kind of is the makeup we need to go with, but I'm sure West Virginia would love to partner with Pittsburgh anytime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I look at it from the standpoint of many parts of Appalachia aren't equipped to transition smoothly into the 21st century economy. And that's for coal mining, that's for things across the board. John mentioned rural broadband. So I think the prescriptive solution, there's not one answer, but it's sort of like an all of the above thing. I think that there are, the problem, like especially with West Virginia, is that it's been so reliant on the energy and extraction industry that when things like coal, for example, are falling out of vogue and just like not the most efficient, most cost efficient and effective way of consuming burning energy, those people are like forgotten about. Miners are forgotten about, and the people that have worked there. And so I think that like there's a number of problems associated with that. One is what do you do for those miners? And there's like John and I think in the episode that we mentioned, like we didn't really have a great policy solution. There's a number of things you can do, and I think that like the renewable energy industry is got some real opportunity. There's a lot of really smart people working to make that happen. A couple folks that we hope to have on our show soon. And so I think that that's certainly an aspect of it. And I think that we talk about cannabis a lot as a cash crop for the region. And we really strongly believe that that could be a very powerful economic driver, both from an agricultural standpoint, but also from a small business standpoint. So I think that like diversifying the economy is really important. But to the point about coding, I think like the conversation about that should be, what are we teaching in schools? And this goes far beyond just Appalachia, but I mean, are we teaching our kids to be prepared for the 21st century economy? And so like teaching kids coding in schools is something I think totally makes sense, and you can prepare and equip people to work jobs like that in Appalachia. So I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to spin that, but I think that really what's missing right now is a lack of investment, both financially and just like from political capital standpoint and just from a time standpoint from leaders across Appalachia to really fix that problem. I mean, and it's a growing issue. It's a growing issue because what do you do for a town like Montcole that the coal mines close? Or for Williamson, West Virginia, or for like, parts of Kentucky and Pennsylvania and Ohio, and Virginia. And like, what do you do with those places? Well, right now they're just left to die. So something has to be done. John and I don't put ourselves on a pedestal and say that we know what the answers are, but we're damn sure going to make a lot of suggestions and bring up the issue.
Mm-hmm. I think that intellectual curiosity you bring up is also really important, especially when it comes to what education looks like in the future. And that's something that like you can kind of sew into the daily fabric of your life, whether you're talking to people on a podcast or just, on your porch.
Yeah. And just to like really quickly add to that point, since you mentioned education, I mean, one of the biggest things that can be fixed right now is expanding rural broadband so that students like who are unfortunately not able to attend class because of the coronavirus can still continue their education at home and be able to be provided those resources to do so. I have my sister, like granted she lives in Parkersburg, which has decent internet, but not by any means phenomenal. I mean, like her kids aren't capable of doing learning or remote learning, and so they just have to end their school year like right now, and they're going to be so far behind from a learning standpoint, and that's the case throughout that state and throughout all of Appalachia. And so it's something that like there's so many issues with that, but like I think that they all kind of tie together in a way.
Yeah, nothing is unrelated, right?
Yeah.
It's all part and parcel. So, which kind of brings us to our last question and a beautiful song. What is Appalachia?
Ooh.
There was a big pause after I asked that.
Yeah.
Well, I was waiting to see who was going to answer that one first.
Well, I guess I can take a stab at it. I don't think there's one definition of it. If you want to look at like technical definition, you can look at the Appalachian Regional Commission, which identified a number of counties that fell within the commission's jurisdiction. But I think it is people, it is an identity, it is a culture, and it is a beautiful fabric of our country that is unknown to the majority of people that live in our country.
Yeah, to me, Appalachia is a place that's often forced to have a definition that it never actually defined itself. It's a place where people are always willing to give you the shirt off their back. I mean, I grew up super poor, and I had every community member, every neighbor always looking out for my family. I mean, and they never had to. I mean, Appalachia is a place that if you really want to meet people and you really want to know what quote unquote Southern hospitality is, it's Appalachia. I mean, it's a place where everybody is welcome, no matter what the news tells you. It is by far the kindest, most loyal people. I mean, the thing I'll end it with is like, if you ever, if you know anything about like WVU sports or West Virginia, we can talk bad to each other. We can talk badly about, about our best friends. But if you talk any type of crap about like WVU sports or Mountaineers or even Brad Paisley, we will by far go to the death to defend them. And that's kind of the feeling that Appalachia has. It's just kind of us against them. And if you're not with us, screw you.
Yeah. It's home. It's home. That's what it is. It's home. And it defines itself because, like John mentioned, it's been defined by other people, throughout the entire existence. And so it's something that defines itself. And I know that, like we say in our intro, we define and defend Appalachia, but what we mean by that is that we help others tell their story, and we also tell our own story.
And it's got banging pepperoni rolls.
Damn right.
So much to love. So much to love about Appalachia. Well said, and thank you. I hope that's something that we all continue to uphold, is this ability to change our own definitions of what it means to be a part of this region. And I think something that has also defined the region is, of course, the John Denver song, Country Roads.
That is true.
And I'd like to invite on the Rechtenwalds. In order, you all are welcome to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you'll be singing today.
Yeah, thanks. Jerry and Sandy Rechtenwald here. We're going to sing one of our favorite songs for you by John Denver, and it's called Country Roads. And Sandy and I are big fans of Appalachia and certainly of West Virginia. So
Blue Ridge Mountains. Yeah.
So we're happy to share this with you today. West Virginia, bound in love, take me home. Country road, take me home. Down country road. Yeehaw!
Oh, beautiful. And
Wonderful.
If we wanted to hear more of these beautiful tunes at any point, is there a place where we could do that?
Yeah, there is. We've been doing some singing lately on our, doing some Facebook Live stuff on our Facebook page, cleverly titled Sandy and Jerry Rechtenwald.
Jerry and Sandy Rechtenwald.
Oh.
Nice to put me first, though, but
yeah.
It's Jerry and Sandy Rechtenwald, Sandy with an I.
So check with Noah if you want to know the correct spelling of Rechtenwald. But yeah, so we're singing on that Facebook pretty regularly nowadays.
We have some recordings too, but we've been doing some live concerts, and we're going to continue doing them on our Facebook page. It's been a lot of fun.
Where are y'all from?
Yeah, I'm from Pittsburgh. We're both really pretty much from Pittsburgh, Western PA. I grew up on the upper north side of Pittsburgh. And Sandy's from here in Elwood City. And
Farmville, actually.
Yeah.
Song though.
Well, I don't know if I have the power to do this, but I'm gonna make you honorary West Virginians because you did that song a solid. So
Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
we appreciate it.
Second.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
We
All in
enjoyed being
favor.
part of this.
That was
Yeah, thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Hey,
That was wonderful.
we'd be glad to be back anytime.
Oh, thank you. That's great news. Yeah, and speaking of any time, we'll be here on Zoom every Thursday evening at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard, and we'll just be talking and hanging out on the virtual front porch. This week, we're going to try something new. We're going to send out kind of a post follow-up survey just to kind of get opinions. If there's anything that you'd like to see on this or that you would really like to not see on this, we would love to hear about it. So we'll follow up with that.
Yep, I can follow up with that, just like Felicia said. And I want to thank the both of you for talking with us. You know, in this time of isolation, it is a real joy to talk to people, like you said, people that are close to us from, you know, years past, but to have the opportunity to talk to someone you don't know in a time like this is a real treasure. And to share this virtual space with the both of you is really wonderful, especially because I feel like our work is very akin to what you are doing in this way of just trying to share stories and share voices. And it's really wonderful to meet you both. I feel like I could question you for a long time.
Well, thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks y'all so much. This is a really, really cool idea that y'all put together, and we really enjoyed being a part of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been lovely. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, see you guys later. Have a great rest of your day. Check out YouTube if you get a hankering for more stories.
Yeah.
Thanks y'all.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.